how does a state government dealing with this huge homelessness crisis end up spending over $13 million in just 6 months, just protecting empty houses?
Yeah, it's not a hypothetical. That's the reality we're looking at today in Los Angeles.
It really is. And it's kind of the core, the shocking thing we're diving into.
It's a pretty stunning example, isn't it? Government inefficiency sort of crashing right into urban disorder and, well, fundamental questions about property rights.
Right.
We've pulled together sources covering this whole Caltrans controversy, the California Department of Transportation, and all these vacant properties they own along where the 710 freeway was supposed to go.
So our mission for you, the listener, today is pretty straightforward. We're unpacking the, frankly, astronomical cost of this state failure, and also the intense legal fight that kicked off when activists, well, they decided to seize state property.
Yeah.
And just the sheer amount of bureaucratic red tape that's stopping these homes from actually helping anybody.
And here's the stat. The one that should make every taxpayer listening just, pause for a second.
Okay.
Between November and April, Caltrans spent more than $13 million, taxpayer dollars, directly on law enforcement and private security, just to guard about 120 empty homes.
13 million. Not on repairs, not helping people move in, but just keeping the doors locked. On houses the state should have dealt with years, decades ago.
It's mind-boggling when you break it down.
That's over $100,000 per house, just on security.
6 months.
That's the price of bureaucracy failing.
Exactly. So let's look closer at that spending. Part one. The outrageous cost of empty houses and what you could call organized disorder. This huge security bill, it became necessary because these properties bought decades back for a freeway that died on the vine were being actively targeted.
And this wasn't just random damage, right? We're talking about organized groups.
Yeah. That's right. Security patrols got ramped up massively after groups like the Reclaimers started protesting housing costs by actually moving families into these vacant state-owned homes, seizing assets.
Wow.
So, when people take public property, the state has a responsibility, legally, maybe morally too, to defend those assets, maintain public safety.
So the security was a reaction.
Absolutely, a reaction to illegal seizure.
Yeah.
Guarding against more break-ins, vandalism, anything like that. And, one source we looked at put it very bluntly.
Oh, sorry.
It basically said, theft is bad, this is theft, therefore these people are bad. Just laying out that basic property rights view. Okay.
So the security cost is, in effect, the price tag for defending property rights against this organized action. But still, the amount, $13 million. It's huge.
Oh, it's eye-popping. Yeah. The breakdown. CHP, the California Highway Patrol, their security details cost almost $9 million.
$9 million just for CHP in like 5 months.
Yeah. And then you add the private guys.
Right, Intercon.
5 months of their services. Over $4 million more out of taxpayer pockets.
So, yeah, $13 million total. I remember reading a city councilman called it quite exorbitant.
He did, even while, acknowledging it was needed because these empty houses, they'd become problems. Magnets for crime, described as beacons for drug dealers and thieves.
It's hard not to hear that number, 13 million, and think, why didn't they just use that money to fix up the houses, rent them out? Did they try anything?
Well, they did try a sort of stopgap measure, the LA Housing Authority, HELA. They tried to negotiate temporary emergency housing deals for 25 households, the ones who had already broken in.
Okay, so a temporary solution.
Exactly. Yeah. Temporary. Even those leases were designed to expire. The tenants would still have to leave. So the whole thing is just this painful example of costly reactive defense, protecting assets that were only empty because of decades of government planning failure in the first place.
Which really brings us to the core reason this is all happening.
Yeah.
Right? The 13 million is a symptom.
That's a good way to put it.
The real problem is the bureaucracy. Why do they still own these houses? It's been decades since the freeway was canceled. Why can't the state just sell them cheap? Or even for $1? Get something done.
And that's where we hit part two. Bureaucracy, property laws, and stalled sales.
Okay.
The root of this mess, it goes back over 60 years. Caltrans buying up houses for the State Route 710 extension, which, as we know, got canceled.
Right.
Now, Caltrans' official goal is to sell them. They say they want to prioritize affordable sales, especially for current tenants or first-time buyers.
And they have sold some, haven't they? I saw something about 37 properties.
They have, yeah. They awarded 37 vacant homes and lots to the city and some nonprofits. affordable housing focus through a competitive bid process. Those sales were supposed to happen early this year, 2024.
Okay, so some movement, but what about the other 80, 90 homes? Why is that process so incredibly slow? It seems like an emergency. Shouldn't it move faster?
Well, because the state is basically caught in its own web. A legal framework, a regulatory maze that really prioritizes protecting transportation funds over, say, quickly solving a housing crisis. And the key thing, the real barrier, it's how the land was paid for all those decades ago, the source of the funds.
Okay, explain this red tape barrier. What are these specific rules?
Well, the first big one is in California's own constitution, Article 19.
Article 9X, okay.
It essentially says state gas tax money, the money you pay at the pump for roads and highways, can only be used for transportation purposes.
Right.
So if Caltrans sells land bought with those funds, they generally have to sell it at fair market value. The idea is to get that transportation money back into the transportation fund.
But hang on, isn't that rule, Article 9X, actually good? I mean, isn't it designed to stop politicians from just giving away public land to buddies for pennies on the dollar?
That's the perfect point.
If they sell below market, aren't they basically giving away money that should be fixing roads? So are we criticizing a law for doing its job, protecting public money?
You've hit the nail on the head. That is the conflict. The law's intent, preventing waste or corruption, it makes sense on paper.
Yeah.
But the unintended consequence when you're facing a massive housing crisis like LA's is gridlock. This obligation to sell at fair market value stops the state from just donating the property or selling it super cheap, because doing that would arguably violate the constitutional protection of those transportation dollars.
Wow, okay. And the feds have similar rules.
Exactly. Federal regulations, specifically 23 CFR section 710.403E, say if the property was bought with federal highway funds, Title 23 funds, then current fair market value must be charged when they sell it.
So state constitution, federal regulations, both demanding top dollar.
Pretty much locks them in. Even if they want to sell faster and cheaper to help with housing, these rules demand market value.
So the government's own rules, set up to protect public money from being, frittered away, are now actively stopping the government from using these assets to solve this huge crisis they have.
It creates a massive hurdle. And the Caltrans internal rulebook, their right-of-way manual directive, RWMD 2402, it confirms this. It says compliance with fair market value rules remains in place.
So how do they ever sell below market? You mentioned some affordable housing sales.
The only way around it legally is if they can prove definitively that no state gas tax or federal funds were used to buy that specific parcel way back when.
60 years ago.
Yeah. So imagine the work involved. Digging through ancient records for each property, that massive time-consuming search is the red tape slowing the whole disposal process down.
It just locks the property into this expensive limbo. And suddenly that $13 million security bill starts looking like the ongoing cost of just maintaining these rigid, old bureaucratic rules.
It certainly looks that way. Now, let's maybe zoom out a bit in part 3. Look at the bigger picture. Speculation, property ownership in LA. Because, the Caltrans mess is just 120 homes.
Right. A drop in the bucket, really.
The scale of vacancy across the whole city, no matter who owns it, is pretty staggering.
Yeah, I saw figures from a UCLA law report. Los Angeles has over, 93,000 vacant units citywide?
93,500, yeah. It's a huge number of potential homes just sitting empty. And it's not just places waiting for a renter to sign a lease. No.
Yeah.
Over 46,000 of those, nearly half, are classified as non-market vacant. Meaning they're being held off the market deliberately. Maybe they're second homes, maybe purely investments, maybe just waiting for land values to go up even more.
So it doesn't matter if the government owns it and it's empty because of red tape, or a private investor owns it and it's empty because they're speculating.
The result for someone needing a home is exactly the same. No housing available.
And who owns most of this property? Is it individuals?
Well, that's another key point from the sources. The concentration of ownership is pretty intense. Nearly 67%, 2/3 of all residential units in LA, owned by investment vehicles or corporate entities.
Wow. Not just individuals or families.
No, and these same entities, they own almost 77% of all privately owned vacant lot area in the city.
77% of the empty lots.
Yeah. If you add it all up, it's over 22 square miles of unused, valuable land held by corporate investors.
22 square miles, that's hard to even picture. And they're not building.
Well, Apparently, the calculation for many is that just holding the land is the better bet. They're betting on land values continuing to skyrocket, maybe more than they'd make from rent.
Which suggests that existing government policies might actually be, maybe accidentally, helping the speculation happen. How does that work?
By kind of lowering the risk or the cost of just sitting on the property, land values in LA have been rising steadily for a long time, right? Combine that with Proposition 13. That's the 1978 amendment that limits property tax increases, locking them close to the original purchase price.
Prop 13. Okay.
It means investors who bought land years ago, even if it's incredibly valuable now, they aren't paying cripplingly high property taxes each year.
So the tax bill is manageable. They don't need rent money to cover it.
Exactly. The tax code itself, which was meant to give stability to homeowners, kind of creates this side effect. It allows large investors to hold these assets off the market relatively cheaply, just waiting for the price to peak.
Okay, that's the ultimate bureaucratic irony, isn't it? The government uses one old rule, Article 9X, that stops itself from selling property cheap. While another old law, Prop 13, basically incentivizes private companies to hold their property vacant.
It's quite the tangle. And the solutions proposed, at least from the activist side described in the sources, they involve adding more complex government layers. Oh, things like a vacant homes penalty tax, a real estate transfer tax, something called a flighting tax, even an out-of-state transaction tax. Really heavy-handed stuff.
So are those proposals just about raising money, or are they designed to punish people for holding vacant property? Because that sounds like a pretty aggressive attack on how people use their own property.
They definitely represent massive interventions, yeah. They seem to treat land ownership less as a private right and more like a kind of civic duty that needs heavy regulation and taxation if you're not using it the right way.
Rather than fixing the underlying structures like Prop 13 or Article 19.
Right. Instead of reforming the existing frameworks that might be enabling the problem, the push is for adding layers of new taxes and penalties. It's a big shift towards more government control over private assets.
Okay. So let's recap. We've looked at the immediate crisis activists seizing state property. We've seen the frankly, staggering cost of defending those assets, $13 million just for security. And we've dug into the complex legal and bureaucratic walls, the state constitution, federal rules, the sheer difficulty of navigating decades-old funding records that stopped California from just dealing with these empty houses quickly.
And the core conflict seems pretty clear now, doesn't it? Whether it's the state owning vacant houses or big corporate entities owning them.
The result is the same, empty homes.
Exactly. On the state side, it's stuck because of bureaucratic red tape and rules requiring fair market sales. On the private side, it sits empty partly because of market speculation, which is arguably encouraged by existing regulations and tax laws like Prop 13.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, it kind of seems like the biggest roadblock to actually housing people quickly in LA might be the government itself.
Yeah.
Both the original planning failures from 60 years ago that led to owning this land.
Right.
And the rigid legal rules today that keep valuable property locked up, costing millions just to guard.
That $13 million spent guarding 120 houses. It feels like a perfect small-scale example of a much bigger problem.
Which is the government's struggle to manage its own assets effectively, or, adapt these really old legal structures to today's reality. Yes, enforcing property rights against theft was necessary in that moment.
Right.
But the reason the property was sitting there empty and vulnerable in the first place goes back to this deep-seated bureaucratic inertia.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you to chew on. If the government's failure to manage just 120 homes cost us, the taxpayers, $13 million in security alone, what's the real hidden cost? The total cost of the entire bureaucratic machine, from Prop 13 letting investors sit on land cheap to Article 9X stopping the state from selling its own land cheap, that whole system controlling and often blocking the housing market in Los Angeles.